Welcome to this new video series where we'll be building an Amazon clone or an e-commerce shop. And we're going to build it with NestJS, React, Redux, Mongo, and we're going to set up the Mongo database using Docker. So it's super easy to set up on our local machine. And then we're going to connect to it using Mongoose to connect between the Mongo database and our objects in NestJS. So in this video, we're going to focus on all of the CRUD operations as well as setting up our backend of the project. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, first things first, we're going to need to have the NestJS CLI. So just on the docs.nestjs.com, we can go npm install -g for globally installing the @nestjs CLI on our desktop. And then we can have access to the CLI, so we can run nest new project name. And if you've come from Angular, the CLI should be familiar. NestJS is actually based on Angular, but for the backend. But I've done a whole video series. I built a LinkedIn clone using Angular and NestJS and Postgres. So that's a 30-hour video series, and there's quite a lot of good information there. So please check that out if you prefer the Angular and the database, the Postgres database for a relational database. And I wanted to do something different in this one, so we'll go with React, Redux, and Mongo. So just a few things. Just you need to have Docker Desktop installed, and you need to open it up. So without further ado, let's get started. So I've built this empty project here. I'm in an empty folder called Amazon clone. Now the first thing I want to do is just set up the database, and I don't want to install Mongo on my local computer or anything like that. So let's just go ahead and do it with Docker, and we're going to do it super easy. We'll go here, we'll create a new file, docker compose, docker-compose-yml or YAML. And you see you get this nice little picture here if you have the extensions on. And we're going to use Docker Compose version 3.8. I believe that's the latest, or the latest stable at least. So we've got that there. And then for our services, let's go ahead and define those. So for our services, we're going to have Mongo. I might just put a space here. So we're going to need Mongo, of course. So I'm going to give this a container name of Mongo. And I'm going to give it an image relating to Mongo latest, just the latest version of Mongo. Now for the environment variables, now we're not going to do all of the configuration one would normally do with setting up a database connection where you have the username and password and all that sort of stuff. I have done that in the previous video with the Postgres, but for this purposes of this video series, I just want a simple project that I can just develop in locally. So all I'm going to do is just have the name of the database that I'm creating. So I'm going to have a variable here called Mongo database, and that means we don't need to specify, the passwords, host, all that sort of stuff. But for the Mongo database name, I'm just going to call it, let's see, Amazon. And for our ports, now I believe Mongo, it runs on port 27017 by default. So we're going to map from our local machine port to the Docker container. So we just have this semicolon here, 27017 to 27017. And then rather than using something like Compass or MongoDB in the cloud or something like that, I'm just going to do it in the web browser. So it's super simple. And for that, I'm going to run this service mongo-express. So I can pretty much just copy most of this stuff here. And it's really important that you get the indentation right, otherwise you get complaints. So we'll call this container mongo-express, and this is just what's listed when you run your Docker container. Now for the image, I'm just going to say mongo-express. Now for the environment, what I'll have here is I'll have a variable, so mongo-express underscore config underscore mongodb underscore server, and this is just going to be set to Mongo. And then I will have the same sort of thing, but for the port. So mongo-express config underscore mongodb underscore port equals 27017. So we've got this port here. And before we have these ports here, we'll have something here. We'll have depends on and depends on Mongo. So just to clarify, Mongo is the database and mongo-express is the GUI that we're going to be able to look at the database in the web browser. And we're doing this without installing these on our local machine, although we will need to install it in a container for Docker. So we'll need access to the image on our machine. So they'll still take memory up, but we don't actually have to, install it and connect to the database as we would normally need to do. Of course, if you did want to do that, there's plenty of documentation on the NestJS website in, where is it? In techniques in Mongo, and it shows you how to connect, in the more standard way. So you pretty much just follow those steps, but I'm going to go through all of the code that you see on the Nest side of things here anyway. It's just if you wanted to connect to Mongo, either through the cloud or on your local machine or something like that, and then actually deploy it, and then you will need all the passwords and all that stuff set up. But again, we're just doing this for development purposes, so let's just keep it nice and easy. And with that, we have the ability to run our database. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up the terminal here. And I'm just going to go and open a PowerShell because I was playing around with my settings and I screwed up my bash command line. So I'm just going to go to the PowerShell one. And all I really need to do here is run docker-compose. Oh, and I should probably mention that the database is going to be on port 27017. And, we're able to detect that. But then the actual GUI that we're displaying, we're going to map that on port 8081. So we're in the root of our project here. We can just go ahead and run docker compose up, and then we can just tack on this -d flag here, and that will run it in detached mode. And all that means is, well, we need to create that, of course. They'll probably create a little longer on your computer because I've already have the mongo-express installed. But notice how that we can still use the command line. If we weren't using the detached command, we would be blocking that. And of course, you could just open another PowerShell, but if you want to make sure what services are up, you can just run docker ps here. And as you can see here, we've got our Mongo Express and we got our Mongo version with the latest version they're running. So if we actually go to the computer, to the browser, we can go to localhost, and we can go to localhost 8081, and we can see that we actually have the database. So we're actually looking at this on the browser. You may be used to looking at this, in an application or something like that, or in the cloud, but here we are actually just running it on the browser. So that's cool. That makes it easy for us. So if we go to the very introduction, we can see we can run this new command here, nest new, and whatever we want the project name to be. So I'm just going to go into my command line here, and I'm just going to run nest new, and I'm just going to call this API. And I'm just going to run that with npm. And this is just going to take, a few moments to load. So I might just explain the folder structure in case you've never used NestJS before. It helps if you've used a framework like Angular or React. It's very similar to Angular. But in all these frameworks, all these JavaScript frameworks, you start off with looking at the package JSON. This is where all your dependencies are. And when you run npm install, it creates the node modules. And then if you have any other third parties, libraries that you need to consume, you install it, it goes in there. We got some TS configuration stuff because TypeScript is, NestJS uses TypeScript. It also has RxJS in it, but we will go for the async await approach. If you want to know how to do the RxJS approach with observables, I'd recommend checking out my other video with the Postgres database where we set that up. But just to get a feeling for the RxJS stuff, I wanted to do something different in here, so we're learning new stuff. That's just related to the TS configuration. README is just the README, of course. By default, you just get the NestJS README. We've got the Nest CLI here. Now it comes with Prettier and a git ignore file. So it ignores node modules and the dist folder, for example. Prettier just, as you probably know, just reformats things into a consistent way. And then we've got ESLint. So ESLinting. Linting's just to make sure you're doing things in a consistent way throughout the project. So, for example, you might have some rule on where none of your variables can start with, $sign or something like that. You can configure those rules, but by default it comes with the, the ESLint integrated with Prettier. So yeah, TypeScript's native tests folder. This is for your end-to-end testing or your integration testing. We probably won't be doing that, but if you do want to know about testing, I've done videos on that in the previous video series. Really, what I want to do in this video series is not go into detail about everything. I did go into a lot of detail in my LinkedIn clone video series, and there's plenty of good information in that. What I wanted to do is sort of focus on things that I didn't cover on that, or do it in a different way. And so most importantly is this source folder here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and off the bat just delete the spec file here. The spec file is, the unit testing file associated with it. We're not going to do that. So we got main TS. This is the entry point of the NestJS application, and it uses this Nest factory, and that just wraps the app module, which is an important thing, and then we bootstrap the application. And essentially what this does is it just creates a server for us and removes all the boilerplate associated with a node server and adds some enhancements and stuff like that and all the Nest functionality. So the key thing to note here is it's starting our server based on the app module. So NestJS, it embraces modularity. So if you're coming from Angular, this should all seem very, very familiar. But if you're not, basically a module is a way to separate your code into sections or to features. So this is like the base file or your base module. And if you were to have other modules, let's say you have a authentication module to handle logging and registration and stuff like that, which we will do in this series. You know, you'll have to import the module, and then this is where it's basically, you know, the global spot to list all the files you have out in your project. So modules, a module can contain a controller and a service. And a controller is essentially your endpoint. You want to have a little amount of code in there as possible. So you just have the API endpoint. So, you know, localhost 3000/product or something like that. The service is where you, you know, you sort of start to interact with the database. Now we'll be using Mongoose to do that. So there's another layer of abstraction there. So, you know, we're using a, not an ORM, but an ODM. In relational databases, it's a object relational mapper, but in this case, it's, you know, there's no relations. Oh, well, there are, but, you know, Mongo uses document, so it's the object document mapper. And that level of abstraction is there on the service layer. And then we have other files like models and stuff like that. We'll have schemas that represent the document. And then based on the document that we're, you know, that's mimicking the database, the schema, it's the object representation of the data that we're going to have in our database. And then we can use the Mongoose methods there in our service to connect to the schema. We're able to inject it. There's dependency injection as well. That's another thing we'll cover in this video. But just to give you a brief overview, and don't worry if that didn't make sense or you know, it was too easy. We're going to go into details of the application right now. So first things first, I want to create a new module. And in this video series, or in this video in particular, we're going to do the CRUD operations for a product. So I'm just going to have a new module for product. And I'm going to run nest, because we've got the nest CLI, remember? And then G, which is short for generate, and MO, which is short for module. And you can type these out as well. And these are in the NestJS documentation, if you ever forget. There's only a few key ones that you really need to remember. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a module. So I'm just going to close some of these files up. And we can close this Docker Compose file now too. Oh, well, there's the first mistake. I was not in the API folder, so let's just cd into the API folder and then rerun that command. I just went ahead and deleted that outside of there. In the next video, or the next couple of videos, we'll create a React project in this base as well. So what you can see here is, first thing is we're in the app module. Remember, that's what gets bootstrapped and sort of, you know, contains all of our files together. And then, you know, the product module will have all the files related to product in that module, but then that's referenced here. So, you know, the application has reference to all of the files. So yeah, you notice that in the app module, it just imports it. And then in this decorator here, in the module decorator, so NestJS uses decorators to decorate your classes. And that's how you're able to give metadata to the class to determine if it's a module, if it's a controller, if it's a service, and then based on the type of class it is, you have special additional properties or functionalities that you can use. But you'll notice here, it created this product folder for us, and it also created this product module here. And if you compare the two, they're quite similar. Now we don't have any imports or controllers or providers just yet, but when we create new files, we'll see them come into action. So let's just go ahead and do that. So let's just use the CLI. And one thing to note is you'll see that we created this, and when we're using the CLI, it sort of nests the folders in. So it creates the product folder for you and then the corresponding file associating with the command there. I find that to be slightly inconvenient for, when I'm doing regular development. So let's say I want to get a controller. So I'll just go nestjco to get the controller in. And then I can go product, and then I'll just go product again. So the first product is saying that I'm in the product folder relative to the source folder, the root of the source folder. The second product is saying I want the name of the file to be product. And then we can have this -- flat command here. And that'll just make it so, unlike the first command where it created the folder around that file, it won't do that. So, and I can also do the -- no spec here. And that just makes sure that there isn't any of the spec files, because we're not going to be doing any of the testing, because by default you get the spec file there. So I'm also going to run nestjs product flat no specs, so the same thing but with s there. And that's just going to generate a service for us. And it's all going to make sense. So one thing to note is the product controller got referenced in the product module, and the product service also got referenced in the providers of the product module. And then the entire product module is referenced in the imports here. But unlike something like Angular, you don't need to reference the file there because you inject it, but in NestJS you do need to reference the service file. So here's what a controller looks like. So basically what's happening is if you look at the main file here, you can see that we're bootstrapping the app, and then we're doing that on port 3000, so localhost when we're consuming it on our computer. In dev mode, localhost 3000. And then you could have like a stub for /API, but in this case, the this here is representing the part after the what is it? Localhost 3000 /product. So it's just the after the root of the URL, and we'll show you how to do dynamic stuff there as well. So yeah, that's the controller. And to use the controller, we can have an annotation. So we can have the, let's start off by posting a product, because we won't be able to get one just yet. And there's these annotations such as post and get and patch and delete. And they allow us to determine what type of HTTP method that the method that we're calling, or the route that we're calling, is going to be. So what we'll have here is, and we need to have parentheses after these. So this is just another annotation. So you're starting to see that you have all these annotations everywhere. You have this annotation to let the class know that's a controller. Then you have this annotation here. So NestJS is sort of like a hybrid between like Node, Angular, and maybe something like Java or something like that. So it's really cool. It's sort of like you get the structure that you need, like of an enterprise grade project, sort of like how Java gives it to you, but you can do it in the JavaScript way and architect the project similar to an Angular project, or just having a good folder structure in general, and then write it all in JavaScript. So I really, really like it. So I think it's my favorite backend framework, to be honest. But let's just start off by creating something here. Now, I'm creating a method here, and it doesn't actually matter what this is called. Because what's happening here is if you make a post request to localhost 3000/product, it's just going to detect the post here, and it's just going to run this method. But of course, it's good to have descriptive names, so you know you can just easily read your code and come back to it. Now, when we create a product, we're going to have 3 different properties, and we're going to have them in the body. So there's this body annotation here, and I just realized I'm going to need to connect to the database. So let me just do that before I get into all of this stuff. So since we've set up Docker, it's actually really easy to connect to our database. All we really need to do is go to the app module, and then imports. We're going to use another module, but we didn't create this module, but we installed it from Mongoose. So there's the, actually we haven't done that either. All right, so let me go ahead and get those. So I'm going to run npm install --save at nestjs/mongoose, which is the wrapper, the NestJS implementation of Mongoose. So let me go ahead and get those. And I'll just go ahead and install that. And if we just open our Docker Compose here, we have this database here, and we've just called it Amazon. So we just need to remember that. Or we could even reference the variable there. But I'm just going to do it super simple. I don't feel the necessary. I don't find it necessary to have the environment variables and stuff like that. I did do that in the previous project if you do want to do it more robustly. But yeah, again, this is for development purposes. We can just go ahead and we can say MongoDB. Oh, I'm not actually getting the import here. What I'll do is I'll just type it out manually. So I like to separate my, the native libraries from my ones that I've written. And then I'd like to have, if I need them, any third-party libraries here. But this is coming from the Mongoose Oh, I spelt it wrong. It's the Mongoose module, not the Mongoose. So you probably picked up on that. That's why I wasn't getting the IntelliSense. So that's cool. Save myself typing that out. Now for the URL here, we can just say Mongoose module for root. For root implies that it's going to be, globally accessible in the same way it is in something like Angular or something like that. Like a service there. Of course, you don't need to know that. It's just if you're coming from Angular, which lots of developers that like Angular and Node, they love NestJS. It's like their favorite language. But of course, I'm doing this project in React, so I keep making these references to Angular, but you don't need to know anything about that. You might actually learn it the other way around. Like, oh, that's cool. That's features in Angular. You know, lots of React developers, you know, they hate Angular for whatever reason. You know, there's a high learning curve there to it. But it has benefits, and I think a good way to convert React developers into the Angular ecosystem is this NestJS. You know, they find a node, they get into Node. You know, they find they're having problems structuring their projects out. You know, having this nice, opinionated, consistent way of doing things is really nice. And then who knows, you might end up going the other way and jumping over. So I'm just going to call this the same name as what I called it in the Docker Compose. So Amazon. Again, I'm not going to do the environment variable reference, node.process, and then the name of the variable. I'm just going to do it like this because we're not going to have any of the other configuration stuff like that. So just with that, we should be able to connect to our database, which is awesome. Although it's not really doing anything at this stage. So let's just go back to our controller here. And I appreciate that I haven't created this schema yet, but just to get a feel for what's going on, I'm going to go do it from the controller to the service and then build the schema sort of view. But then we'll do a recap doing it the other way around. And I feel like it makes a lot more sense that way. Because we get the understanding of how to implement something. You know, top-down approach, like thinking, oh, I hit a URL. Oh, the URL delegates the logic to a service or just a file that has functions that help that. This controller keep lean. There's an abstraction layer, then it hits the, you know, the mongoose, and then it interacts with the database through the schema. So, I don't know, it depends which way you like to think. So let me just say, I've got this body annotation here. Now, by default, it's expecting JSON and stuff like that. So, you know, it's expecting an object right now with the name attribute or the name property, and we'll call it name. And we're using TypeScript because that's native into NestJS, which makes it really cool. And this is just a string. So, what's going on here? Oh, this should actually be in the, as a parameter. So I'm just going to do this here. I'm going to press Shift-Alt down 2 times because we're going to take this. I'll just press Control-D to get the next one. And I'll just say price here. And then Control-D here. And I'm just going to say description here. Because what we're doing here is we're creating a product. A product's going to have a name. For example, a book might be called, you know, Book A. The price is $1.99. And the description, I'm going to make the description optional here. So just before these colon here, you can have a question mark. That's just like a TypeScript sort of thing. Because we want to be able to create a product, not a post. We want to be able to create a product that maybe we can't be bothered to type the description in. So what we're going to do is, this is where we're actually going to return something from our product service. So we haven't actually done this yet. So let's have a look at the service. So, and I'm realizing now, of course, we're not going to be able to use the service until we have the schema. So what I will do is I'll just go ahead and I'll create the schema. So let me just do that. I'm just going to create a new file. Product.schema. So in hindsight, it's probably better to start with the schema. You know, sort of plan out what your database document's going to sort of look like. Then, you know, when you're coding, then you make the service and then you go to the controller. I just think it's easier to explain it from the controller level, but I think I'll do it in the reverse order than what I thought. I want to start, close to the back end on the database side of things, and then work my way up to the controller, and then I'm going to explain it at the end, recap top down. So product.schema.ts. So what we'll do here is we're going to need the schema, because we're going to annotate our class as a schema, and that's just coming from NestJS/Mongoose here. And, we can just export a class here. We'll call it product. Now, we're going to have a name, which is a string, but we can actually annotate, because we're using a schema here. We can actually annotate with the NestJS implementation of Mongoose that this is a property, or a prop for short. And we can optionally pass in an object here, and we can just say required is true. Now, one thing you probably noticed is I have not put the ID here, and that's because every single thing in a document, it has an ID, and that's auto-generated for us. So the schema actually, allows for us to not write the ID in. So I'm just going to Shift-Alt down this twice. And I'm going to also have a price here. And this is going to be a number. And this last one, I'm going to make it optional, because we know that the description is going to be optional. So this is a number, this is a string. So that's all well and good. Something we might want to do though, is we might want to export the type. So we can create a type, and we can call it product document. And this is going to be equal to the product, but it's also going to be a document. And a document, where's this coming from? I don't know where this... Well, I wasn't getting the intelligence of that. But it's actually not coming from NestJS Mongoose. It's just coming straight from Mongoose. Let's just go ahead and type that out there. Press save. So if we just press, F12 and go into the document here, we can see that it has the underscore ID, which is how Mongo, it auto generates that for us, the ID. And it also generates this underscore V, which relates to the version of the API. When you first get started, that just sort of gets in the way a little bit, but I think it becomes important if you're, building software long term. So what I'm saying here, and of course there's some helper stuff here, but what I'm saying here is it's going to, a product document is both this product class and the document. So, when you create it in Mongo, it has that there, like these three types here, these three properties, as well as the Mongo document stuff. So that's all that is there. So based on that class, we can actually just say, okay, well, we can just export a constant here, and I'm just going to call this product schema, and then we can use the schema factory from NestJS Mongoose, and we can say create for class, and then we can go ahead and we can just put the product in that we created there. So this will take the class. In some circumstances, we want to refer to the class, so just product. Sometimes we want to refer to the product document. So when we get something in its current state, we're going to get the product document. We could adapt that. but we'll just leave it as the product document, adapt it into a product. So getting rid of the, the underscore v and stuff like that. But we're just going to start off nice and easy, and we're just going to gradually build up and up to more and more complex things. So I'm purposely starting off super easy. It may be slow if you've already watched some of my NestJS stuff, but I wanted to make sure, for everyone just starting off on this series, that it's super clear what's going on. So feel free to speed it up 1.5, 2 times, copy the code, and then, work on, maybe 7 commits from now or something like that. There might be some cool stuff. But there's definitely going to be stuff in this course for everyone to learn. Just didn't want to rush into it too fast, that's all. So with that said, we've built the schema. This is going to map our database. So, we can start to create our product service now. Now, the first thing to note in a service is, rather than having @service annotation, where we have like @controller here, we don't need that, by the way, or, schema here, we have actually injectable. And injectable means that we can inject the functionality of this service into another file. So it's basically another way of saying we can reuse the functions in this service in, somewhere else, like the controller, for example. So, and we do that by injecting it into the constructor of the JavaScript or the TypeScript class that we're consuming it from. So this will make more sense as we go through it. But in this product service, we're actually going to need to reference this product schema here. And to be able to do that, we need to actually declare, like right now, NestJS doesn't, like it recognizes this class and it sees that we've created this schema, but it's not actually going to, connect that to the database. So to be able to do that, and that's of course what we want, we need to come to our product module, and then we'll just need to have imports here, and it's going to be an array, and then don't forget the comma at the end there. So we're going to need to import the mongoose module, and there's this method called forFeature, and we need to do this every time we create a schema. And what we do is it takes an array, because it can take more than one of objects, and then we have the name of the particular schema that we want. So I'm going to call it product, and we need to remember what we named it because we referenced that somewhere else. And how it connects to the file is we have the schema here, and that's just going to be the product schema that we defined. And that's all we really need there. So I'm just going to put the NestJS stuff at the top, and that down there. So we got the product, or we got the schema that we created, which is based on the class. And then we want to map that and connect to the database that this object represents and the schema represents. So we go to the particular module that we're working in. In this case, we're working in the product module, and the product module is referenced in the global module, and then all the files sort of come together like that. It's pretty nice actually once you get your head around it and get used to it, because every single project you build is done and architected in the same way. So now that we have that, we've got our product schema referenced and we named it, we can actually come back to our service and we can actually have a constructor in here. And pretty much a constructor is reserved for injecting things. You barely use it for setting variables or doing anything like that. You mainly use it for dependency injection. because, the way this framework's set up is it's sort of set up in a way to be able to consistently do things. Of course, there will be exceptions. There will be cases where you need to do stuff in the constructor, but, as a pattern, you only really use these parentheses here as the arguments rather than these ones here. But, depends on the situation, of course. But we can actually have this annotation here, and the annotation's called Injectable. And this is coming from Mongoose. And before we're able to call the Mongoose methods, we need to connect from the database to the model representation, or the object representing it, which is basically the schema that we just referenced. And since we've just called it product in the module here, I can just go ahead and copy that. And that's what we're doing. And then we need an access modifier here, because if we don't have an access modifier, we won't be able to reference the variable throughout the application, or throughout this file, because this is just TypeScript. It's basically, if you have a variable in here, and then you have this dot v equals v, if this variable was v and that wasn't there, and then you're able to reference it. But because we're in TypeScript, we can, in the constructor, there's the constructor shortcut. So you can just say, well, if you have an access modifier, and I'm also going to make it read only, because we don't actually want to, mutate the actual model itself. So we just say it's a read only. And then I'm just going to go ahead and call it the product model. Now this is going to be of the type model. And this model, this is coming from Mongoose actually. But I'm going to have, it's going to be the model based on the product document. So we got the product document coming from product schema. And recall the product document is nothing more than the, it's just the type of the product, but it's the Mongo version of it with those properties there, the document properties that every document has. So model, it's not giving me the IntelliSense for that. So I'm just going to go here and import model, and that's going to come from Mongoose. I'll just save that. So now that I have referenced the model, I'm able to interact with our database just using the Mongoose methods. So I've sort of done all the hard work here. Now we just need to consume that and reap the rewards. So in this class, but below the constructor, we're going to have a method here. We'll call it create. And we're going to create a product. So I didn't call it create product because we're going to be referencing the product service. So it's going to be self-evident that the product service, when you create something, is going to create a product. But of course, you could call it whatever you want. So it's going to be a name, which is a string, a price, which is a number, and then also a description, which is a string. And then this is just a method here. So we need the curly braces. So what I want to do here is I just want to have a constant variable. I'm going to call it new product. I'm not going to call it a product model because TypeScript will be able to infer that, because we're going to instantiate a new object. And we can do that by referring to the product model. And the product model, it can take in things such as the name. Now I don't have to do name to name because, we're in modern JavaScript. So I can just do name, price, description. And if you hover over new product, you'll see that, we're actually getting some IntelliSense there, although not quite what I was expecting, to be honest. I was expecting, a little better IntelliSense there. But nevertheless, we'll just go along with that. And then we can say return new product dot save. So this is Mongoose in action. We've created the model, the product model. We have access to the product model. We're not able to modify it or anything like that. That's just strictly based on the schema that's representing the data in the database, in the Mongo database. So then we have this, object document mapper with all of its magic methods. So we didn't write this. This is coming through from Mongoose. And this will actually, this in itself will go ahead and do all the behavior that we want. So this actually, what this is returning for us is it's actually returning a promise. So in my other videos, I was using observables, and they're a little trickier. I think it's probably easier if you haven't come from Angular or you don't know RxJS to do the async await stuff and promises. So again, if you know RxJS, and TypeScript, this there's another video series for you for that one, or you might be able to just do it by yourself, sort of thing. This video might be a little easy for you, but I'm just going to say I'm going to have a promise here. Now, what it's returning is it's not returning a product. It's not returning a product with that. It's actually returning a product document. And I was alluding to this earlier. You may want to return a product rather than a product document. Like, you may not want to return the __ v and all that sort of stuff. But just for our purposes, I'm just going to keep it simple. And of course, to I'm not using the await keyword, but just to verify that this is indeed async, I'm just going to have the async keyword there. Most of the other ones will have await used in them, but that's just good practice. It signifies that it's an asynchronous function, and since it's the last line, it's okay. If we're doing steps in between, we'll need to await it, sort of thing. And then, we've got this promise of the document type. So now all we need to do is have an endpoint and send it to that. So at the beginning of the video, after we set up the database, we created this controller, or the beginnings of a controller. And we're going to the product endpoint. And we created this post request here. And we passed in the name, the price, the description. So now we know, now we've created this product service, we actually need to use dependency injection to consume that. So I'm just going to get a constructor in here. And I'm just going to use an access modifier so we can reference that. And it's usually we do private. We very rarely do public for services, unless you have a special need to, of course. And then we have a product service, which is of the product service type, so that class that we just created. So, and then I'm just going to need some of this here. So now I can access the methods that we created. So we got create here, and create takes the name, the price, and the description. Now, if description isn't passed, it will just be undefined, and that should be a name here. But that's all we really need. Oh, wait, not name, number. That's all we really need. So fingers crossed. We did a lot of coding. We probably should have checked a few things along the way, but let's just go ahead and run the server. So npm run start dev. This runs the nest.js server in development mode. and we got the Docker container running in detached mode, so that should be all good. So I'm just going to open up Postman here. So we can see that we've got a post request selected. We're at the endpoint localhost 3000/product. We go to the body, we have raw, and then we got JSON here. And then I'm going to have a description here. So I got the name, the price, the description. I'll go ahead and I'll click send. And there we go. We actually got the result without any errors. So that's awesome. Now notice it actually created this ID here and this __v. That's what I was talking about before. So if we want to look in the database, we can actually just refresh port 8081 and we can see that we've got this Amazon database here. We can view it and we can see that we've got a particular collection here. So we created the products collection within our Amazon database. We can view that and we can see that it's generated this record for us and it auto-generated this ID for us, which is a string, a hexadecimal string. And also it's got the version there, but you can see that it's got the description, the price, the name, and we can click on that and we can get the same sort of thing that we got in Postman there. So I sort of like this web browser thing. It makes it really easy just to click around and, you know, you don't have to have the heavy weights of a database on your machine. Although if you're in, you know, developing enterprise, maybe you would want, well, I mean, everything's on the cloud these days, so you're probably doing it through cloud provider. But this is sort of just like a lightweight, super easy way to get going with development, just to, you know, prototype things, do some, you know, hobby projects and stuff like that. And I'll just go ahead and create one more without the description just to demonstrate. So I'm just going to say I'm going to create some water here. And it's $1.99. And then it goes ahead and it creates that. So I just wanted to do that just to illustrate that unlike a relational database, you know, like Postgres, MySQL, etc., you don't actually have to have all the fields there. Like it will be null or something like that in SQL if it allows you to. And it can allow you to do that. It's just when you get the objects back, you know, you don't have to get in the exact same structure. You know, the fields might be missing and stuff like that. And Mongo and Mongoose together make it easy to, you know, consume data in various forms in JSON. It makes it super easy. So that's the main benefit there. So yeah, we've created the post request. Let's just go ahead and finish this up. We'll finish off the read and update and delete, but we've got all the infrastructure in play to be able to easily do that. So probably another 20 minutes. And this should be, you know, the fun part because everything's set up. How do you make CRUD API endpoints? That's always the first question when learning new framework and new tools and stuff like that. It's really the basis of web development in general. In the next video, we'll start to go into authentication and stuff like that as well. But, you know, let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll continue on the CRUD application here. So we've got this post here. We've got the schema, we've got the service. So the schema's set up, the module's set up, the connection's set up. You'll find when all of the things are set up, you only really need to work in the controller and the service. So you just need to, you know, create some more requests and create a few more connections there to the database and do stuff. So that should be super easy. One thing to improve here is the particular type here. Since we know we're returning this promise, which is the product document, or as you've seen here, this, we can just add that type there. I mean, TypeScript will probably infer it anyway, but sometimes, you know, you just need to help it a little bit. Plus, you're able to read it a lot easier. Again, this is a product document, not a product. And just to, reiterate that point, if you wanted maybe you only want to return name, price, description. Maybe you don't want to return the ID and the V there. Like maybe you want the ID, but then not the V, or some sort of combination of the two. Well, in that case, you just need to adapt your data a little bit. I'm not going to do that, but it's kind of common to do that. So instead of having this product document type here, you'll have a product type there after you adapt it. But there's nothing wrong with having the product document here. It is what it is. It just depends on how far you want to go in making things pretty, and how far, obviously this is the very first video, so you're not necessarily building enterprise grade software, but if you're aiming for that, you might want to take a few of these extra steps and take the initiative to, do all these extra things by yourself, sort of thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to make a get method, and I'm going to come back to the product service controller, and I'm just going to do something simple to start off with. I just want an async function. I'm going to call it find all. It's going to return a promise of the product document. However, it's going to be an array of them. So I can just go ahead and specify it's an array of those. And then I can just go ahead and return this .product model that we already have access to. And we can just go find by ID. And then you can just pass in the ID. So the ID is a string, not a number. That's something that confuses you when you start doing Mongo stuff. And then you have this exec command. Now, what's going on here? Oh, this is finding one. I need to find. I don't need it. Yeah, sorry. I was doing the find one method, which is what we'll do next. We only need the find method here. So we're going to have this find all method. We're going to get all the documents back by using the mongoose here. Now we have this exec thing here. I think, if you read the documentation, lots of these methods that are on the model here, they don't actually return a real promise. They return a thenable, which is basically the same thing as a promise. If you didn't have this, it works, but it's slightly better practice to, if you're returning a promise here, just for get the types thing a little bit more, slightly more performant, but it's just something that you just need to tack on. You don't really have to, but may as well. It's easy enough. You don't do it here because you're actually instantiating a new product there. Then you can just call the method there. You typically use it on all things that you're directly using the model, and then you might have some sort of queries or something like that associated with it. So like you might be able to find based on something like ID or something like that. But if I go back to the controller, you can pretty much just copy this here. And then I'm just going to delete all of the parameters. So rather than having a post request, I'm going to have a get request. I'm going to call this find all products. Again, the name doesn't really matter because it's not going to be referenced, but if you've got logging set up or something like that, then maybe it'll show that, but it's just for readability when you're getting started. So we're going to return an array of these. We don't need any of that params, and we can just go ahead and call the find all method that we just created. So we've got two things in here. So when we make the get request here, we get the two product documents back. So that's exactly what we expect. Now, let's say we wanted to just get one thing back, what we'll do is we'll just say find, and we'll find by ID string, and rather than the array, we'll just get one back here. Now I'm going to do the find by ID here, and then I can just pass in the ID, and that means in the controller I can more or less just copy that down here. And then if I start to work on the controller level stuff, now I want to go to /product/ID, and the ID is going to be dynamic, so I might want to have this dynamic path here. And you don't need the slash with all of these things. You don't need the slash at the beginning, it's sort of implied. But if you wanted something after the slash, like after ID, like foo, then you would need another slash there. But this dynamic thing here, basically we need to have a param here, so just an annotation for that particular variable. So this needs to be the same as what we've got here after the colon there. The colon represents that it's dynamic. And this is going to be an ID, and in our case that's going to be a string because we've got the mongoose document. Now it's going to just return one of these rather than all of these, and it's just going to be called find product, and we can just go ahead and we can just go find and find by ID, and then we're just going to need to bring this in here. And let's just pick this taco ID here. Let's go ahead and just get that there. And then we can see that we get that one back. So we've done post, we've done get. It's only logical to do the update and then following by our delete. Now, update's always the trickiest. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and just work on it. It's not really that much trickier. It's just a couple of more steps. That's all. But basically, we can update any one of these properties. So description, price, or name. We can't update the ID or the version, and we shouldn't be able to do that. So we'll have the ID here. And I'm going to just, I was looking for something to copy, but I'm just going to, oh no, I got it here. The price and the number here. Let's see. So I want to be able to, you need to pass the ID in. We're going to have a new price, and I'm calling it new price because we're also going to have a reference to the variable price and description. And there's also going to be a new name, which is a string. So we can create, like based on an existing ID, the same way we did in Postman here, with this ID here, dynamically in the URL as a param here. We want to get that ID, and for that ID, we want to be able to update the name, the price, and the new description. And what this will do is it will return a promise, the product document. So we just need to do a little bit of coding. So let's get the existing product. And this is a good example of the await in action, because what we want to do is we want to await, and we actually got this find method above, which finds it on the ID. So we can just go ahead and use our own code there and do that. And then we can just say, an existing product, this is using this product model. So then we're able to save the existing model, and then we'll overwrite the, that particular referenced product that we've referenced there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the existing product.name. This is going to equal the new name, but the person might not send that across. So I'm just going to do this nullish coalescing, which basically means if it's null or undefined or whatever, use this second parameter here. It's just slightly nicer than the than the ternary operator, or something like that. There's also or. I think this is like just null, and this is like null and no, wait. This is when it's falsy, but this is if it's null or undefined. And I think there's like some slight differences if you look into it. But basically, I'm going to just say here, I'm going to say the price here, and the price here, and the description. If anyone knows a way to preserve the case here, I know there probably would be, but it's something I never look up, so, you know. Oh, it's actually a lowercase here by whatever chance. But yeah, send that shortcut through in a comment or something like that. That would be helpful. It's always something I want to look up and I never do, so I don't know. Maybe that's on me. But basically what I'll do here is I'll run the existing product.save, and then we're just returning that promise there. So now we just need to use that in the controller. So I'm just going to copy this controller here. I'm going to do a patch request, not a put, a patch, because I'm patching the data that already exists. Doesn't really matter. You can use a put if you want. It's basically the same thing. But if I'm going to have an update product here, I got this param ID of a string. Now I just want to copy these params here. So I already got these. So I can get the body of the name, the price, description. Do I not bring patch in? Did I bring put in? Let me check that. Oh no, I just didn't bring it in. So yeah, and then I can just call this product service, and I can call update here, ID, name, price, description, and all the logic is just, they're all on one line, so it's nice and clean. When you got error handling and stuff like that, you might have a couple more lines, but the idea is just to keep it super lean in the controller, delegate the logic to the service, and then the data interaction from the schema and the Mongoose ODM that gives you the methods to be able to do that. So let's just try that out. So we got this get request here. We'll just copy that. Let's go ahead and use the patch method. We'll go to the body here. I don't need all of these things, but let's just keep them there. Let's make I can't remember how much I made it. So I'll make it $22.99, very expensive taco. And if I go back here, and I may need to refresh actually. We got this description here, Mexican food. So let's change it back to a reasonable price. And just to illustrate that you don't need all of these here, I'll just get rid of the description and the name, and then I'll just make it $2.99, and then I'll just undo those. And if I refresh here, you can see there's $2.99, and it didn't, overwrite the description or name or anything like that. So one last method, and then we'll be finished here. And you may want to take this opportunity to pause and have a go at this yourself. All right, welcome back. How'd you go? If not, we'll just work through it together. This is probably one of the easiest methods, especially after we've set everything up. Although you may need to know the Mongoose method to be able to do so. But basically, we just want to delete based on an ID. So we'll just pass that in there. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll just return this .product model, delete 1. And then we're just going to, thing to note is in Mongoose, you see this ID has this underscore here. So we just need to say when the ID is equal to our ID, and then we can just go ahead and use this exec for bespoke reasons. And then finally in our product controller, we can do, I'll copy this get here, it's nice and small. Get the delete method in here, reference it. I'm going to call this delete product. I didn't have a type here, although it's not returning a product document. I'll just leave that empty. I think it's a delete result coming from Mongoose if you want to get the type in there. I'm not too concerned about that though. This product service, and then I can just run delete here. So I will get my, I want to keep the taco. So let's me delete the water here. I'll come to this delete method /product /the ID, click send, and as you can see, you get this deleted count here. So you could make your own type for that or get the delete result. It's totally up to you. So let's just check the database and we can see that's gone. So we just did complete CRUD functionality using NestJS, Mongo, Mongoose, mongo-express, a little bit of Docker to get the mongo-express GUI up. Let me just quickly recap what we've done. So this is NestJS. Well, this Docker Compose is the Mongo database and the Mongo GUI that we ran. Then we got this API running. This is a NestJS project. All of the good stuff's in source. NestJS supports modularity. There's a main module and a main file that references that app module, which bootstraps the application, and then all the files are referenced in that module. We created a product module. Well, firstly, in the app module, we set up our, Mongo database connection. In the product module, we referenced a particular schema. So the product schema is based on the product class with an annotation. And then we made that we referenced the document there. So that's the connection from the, this database here, the actual data. And then this is the object that represents that, or the schema that represents that. And then since we've referenced that product, each of these schemas we need a reference in the particular module we're in. And then we have all of these CRUD application endpoints. So, post, get, patch, delete. So yeah, we do that in the controller, hit the endpoint here, look for the particular HTTP method, any JSON that we need. Then we delegate the logic to a service. The service is injected in the controller, and in the service, that's where we write the logic out. We reference the Mongoose ODM, and that has the methods on it for the particular model or the schema that we've sort of injected into it. We don't touch that. We just sort of do a read only of the structure of that. And finally, all that results in us being able to create an API with CRUD application, CRUD functionalities. So yeah, thanks so much for watching that video. It was slightly disorganized. I know I haven't made a video in about 4 to 5, 6 weeks or so. So it's sort of like doing my first video again. So yeah, thanks for, staying patient on that one. If you've already looked at a whole bunch of NestJS stuff or my other NestJS stuff. But even if you have, hopefully you learned a couple of things about some of these other technologies like mongo-express in the GUI and, even just doing Mongoose stuff in general and having this different approach with async await rather than observables and all that sort of stuff. So as I said before earlier, I think the next video is going to be pretty cool as well. We're going to do some authentication stuff. And then after that, we'll probably implement some of the front end logic or the front end code base, like with React. And we're going to set up with Redux and, you know, do everything properly, make it like a super nice project. You know, if it all goes well, you know, I'll make it into an e-commerce project, like an Amazon clone. You know, add Stripe payment gateways and all that sort of stuff. Again, I didn't want to focus on all of the other details. Like in my other video series, you might want to watch the LinkedIn video series if you're interested in things like, you know, logging, role-based access control, testing. You know, we use like Ionic UI framework to do things like infinite scrolling and all that sort of stuff. I would highly recommend checking it out. It's a really good course. I did it over like I don't know what, like 4, 5, 6 months. You know, once every weekend when I got a bit of time doing that. So definitely worth it if you like this video and you sort of want to, you know, a different angle on things as well. But you know, perhaps you like this style. Again, I started off super slow on purpose, but I'm gonna, you know, ramp up and up and up. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, and if that's exciting, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.